Good evening and welcome to the February 14th, 2023 meeting of the Abington Board of School Directors. I note the attendance of all board members, including Ms. Fazy, who's joining us remotely, with the exception of Mr. Allen and Dr. Kleiman, who are excused. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The Abington Board of School Directors has convened this evening's meeting at the Administration Building, and the public is welcome. In consideration of the health and safety of the school community, this meeting is also being broadcast live on the Abington School District YouTube channel. The meeting is being recorded and will be accessible on the district's website and cable channel no later than Friday, February 17th, 2023, to allow those members of the public who cannot participate to view the proceeding at a later time. Comments from citizens will be conducted in person and by phone. Information regarding participating remotely in public comments will be displayed on the screen at the time of public comment, and the board thanks the public in advance for its cooperation. Prior to this evening's meeting, the board held an executive session regarding personnel. I remind you that this is a place where we hold dignity in high regard. Everyone's voice is respected and welcome in this space. Are there any additional agenda items to be brought about this evening? No? Opening comments from my fellow board members, starting with Ms. Frazier.
Nothing. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for attending.
Thank you. Mr. Kay?
Where I work, we get to use the great skills of the Active Academy children, and they return this semester and doing a phenomenal job, really making every day better. So thank you for letting us utilize their skills.
That brings a smile to my face. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Mowry?
Just welcome to the meeting tonight, everyone.
Thank you. Ms. Glaser?
No, thank you.
Lesser?
Lasser. So close.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate you being here. Mr. Muhammad?
Nothing. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Fetcher?
Yes, I'd like to take a moment to discuss the Auditor General's report.
Thank you.
All 12 school districts audited by the Pennsylvania Department of Auditor General, including Abington, were found to be in compliance with the laws of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the regulations and requirements of the Pennsylvania Department of Education. I would direct the public to our website. The district has a written response, which can be found on our website, as well as our responses to the recommendations, which begin on pages 22 through 24 of the Auditor General's report. All budget presentations and the Pennsylvania Department of Education General Fund budget reports are posted and archived in the Board Docs management system. The Auditor General's report does accurately reflect that Abington School District did not violate any laws. Whether state lawmakers should change the laws and regulations surrounding school districts' budgeting processes is a matter of debate. Regardless of what the legislators decide to do, Abington School District will continue to adhere to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's laws governing budgeting practices to ensure the best possible outcomes for more than 8,500 students in our district. Thank you.
Thank you for that information and for clarifying. Dr. Fetcher, can you please proceed with our student council representatives for this evening?
First, I'd ask Emma Brown from Abington Senior High School to come forward.
Good evening, Dr. Fetcher, Mrs. Brown, and members of the Board of School Directors. My name is Emma Brown, and I am president of the Student Council Executive Board. January and February were exciting months for the senior high. Starting off on January 12th, Abington Wesleyan celebrated their graduating seniors. Senior Matthew McCaughey received the Craig Phillip Memorial Award Scholarship for the class of 2023 for his excellent sportsmanship. On January 19th, students River Hoffman, Samuel Bilas, Gianna Mars, and Isabel Malfera attended the Pennsylvania Music Educators Association to represent Abington. River Hoffman placed 5th for his voice part and will move on to the Region 6 Choral Festival, which will be held this week. On January 20th, the Senior High Library hosted the first annual Cocoa and Cram. Students studied for their midterms with the help of National Honor Society tutors while also sipping on some hot cocoa. Speaking of midterms, great job to all of the senior high students for successfully completing midterm week. On January 22nd, Abington girls basketball player Sari Worley became the all-time leading scorer in Abington girls basketball history, surpassing the previously held record of 1,488 points. Congratulations, Sari, on this amazing accomplishment, and good luck to the girls basketball team in the upcoming playoff games. On January 24th, Abington Senior High's Asian Student Association celebrated the Lunar New Year together. Mr. Barrios, Dr. Wormley, and Mr. Johnson were also able to attend this exciting event. Great job to ASA for hosting this spectacular celebration. On January 27th, the Abington cheerleading team competed at the 2023 PIAA Competitive Cheer Championship, where they advanced to the championship round. Congratulations to the team for having such a great season. On January 30th, the Abington chess team placed first at the annual Checkmate Violence Tournament, which showcases top players in the Philadelphia area. Also on January 30th, the boys and girls swimming and diving team celebrated their senior night, recognizing 14 graduating seniors. February 2nd, Abington's bowling team also celebrated their senior night, recognizing 8 graduating seniors. Also on February 2nd, Abington's DECA Club held a rubber duck fundraiser. Students could buy a duck, which would then be entered into the competition. Students on the swim team pushed the ducks through the pool, and the duck that got to the end first won. The winner received courtside tickets to the 76ers game, and the fundraiser was extremely successful, and DECA ended up raising over $300. On Friday, February 3rd, Abington girls basketball celebrated the 4 seniors with a great win against Wissahickon. The A-Town Steppers were also able to perform at halftime and put on a great show. Following this, the Abington boys basketball team celebrated their 5 seniors on Tuesday, February 7th. Finally, on Thursday, February 9th, Abington's concert choir hosted an open mic night in Cafe C. It was a great fundraiser and an amazing way for the choir to showcase their skills. Also today, the choir performed some Valentine's Day singing grams, which is definitely a student favorite. The senior high is very busy in the next couple of months, and I am excited to continue reporting back all of the amazing things students are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Appreciate, there's a lot going on, and congratulations to all the students who are advancing in competitions and doing great things and raising money for good causes.
Indeed, I look forward to the report. Dr. Fetcher, we can continue.
Yes. At this point, I'd like to ask Julia Gang from Abington Middle School to come forward.
This past month, Student Council had an opportunity to meet with Principal File to raise some concerns from the student body and discuss some upcoming event ideas. We are pleased to report that Principal File was supportive of the students' idea to have hall pass holders installed in the bathrooms. We are also in the preliminary stages of planning our first annual Culture Day. During the month of January, we completed a reboot for our PBIS program in the form of principal assemblies. We celebrated our school resource officer with an appreciation day on Monday, January 9th. Lastly, 3 students created and read short essays about how Martin Luther King's message can spread peace to our school community during morning announcements. During January, TATA held an annual Bring It On competition where the maroon team defeated the white team in an evening of sneaker hunts, human anagrams, scooter relays, and other wacky races. We also took our first 2 trips to the Beat Street Dance Club. We have more fun events planned for our members in the upcoming weeks as well. The students in the Going Green Club are working on this month on painting school spirit rocks for our Abington Middle School Rocks Garden to add to the existing rocks by the administrative entrance to the middle school. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Julie.
A lot going on there as well.
Dr. Fetcher, this evening's honors.
All right. First, I'm going to ask Ms. Ali Artur, our Communications Coordinator, to share some videos highlighting recent media coverage of Abington School District.
Good evening, Mrs. Brown, Dr. Fetcher, and members of the Board of School Directors. Events and activities, as you heard, are going strong so far in 2023 across ASD schools. Local broadcast outlets have highlighted many of our district's happenings. At the end of January, Overlook Elementary School hosted its annual spelling bee with Dr. Melkor serving as one of the special guest judges. 2 students from each classroom in grades 3 to 5 competed, with 5th grader Gabriella Brown winning in a close competition that found the last 2 remaining spellers having to move to a new location because the final round was extending past dismissal time. As Emma shared, in early February, the Student Business Club at Abington Senior High, DECA, hosted a new fundraiser. It was the first ever DECA Duck Race. And Abington Senior High School's orchestra, choir, and symphonic band were also spotlighted in the news as the region prepared for the Eagles' trip to the Super Bowl. The music department recorded a rendition of the Eagles' fight song to get everyone in the spirit. Lastly, the annual National African American Read-In returned to Willow Hill Elementary School, which included students forming a human reading chain from one end of the school to the other. Older students selected books written by African American authors or illustrated by African Americans and read them to the younger students. As you can see, there's much to celebrate in ASD schools, so I'm happy to share this coverage from 6 ABC Action News, CBS Philly, and NBC 10 News.
Students in Montgomery County were put to the ultimate test today with the spelling bee. Overlook Elementary School in Abington Township narrowed the competition down to 22 finalists in 3rd through 5th grades. Front and center with their classmates watching, the kids battled it out here on the stage, going for first place. This is the school's first in-person spelling bee since the pandemic.
Well, it was off to the races in the pool at Abington Senior High School today, and the participants were made of rubber. The action came at the natatorium for the first ever Abington Duck Race. This event is a fundraiser organized by the Student Business Club. Students could buy ducks for $2 each and were eligible for prizes if their duck won a race.
Well, the Eagles fight song has arguably never sounded sweeter than this.
Fly, Eagles, fly, on the road to victory.
All right, love that band sound. This is Abington Senior High School showing its Eagles pride ahead of Super Bowl 57. The orchestra chorus there and the band got together to perform the song and to record this video. They sound amazing.
Amazing. I need a recording of that for my car.
February is Black History Month, and students at a school in Montgomery County are celebrating by honoring Black and brown authors. Today, Willow Hill Elementary participated in the 33rd annual National African American Read-In. Here's how it worked. Students in 3rd through 5th grades selected a book written by a Black author. They then read it aloud to another student from kindergarten to the 2nd grade. All this happened while the students formed a human reading chain from one end of the school to the other.
Thank you, Ms. Artur.
Thank you. Dr. Fetcher, please proceed with this evening's board orientation.
All right, thank you, Ms. Brown. Our plan tonight, when we take a look at our CDC guidance and health and safety plan review, our plan is due for review at this time as it was reviewed last at the August 23rd, 2022 meeting and must be reviewed every 6 months. My recommendation is not to revise the August 23rd, 2022 Health and Safety Plan as it defaults to the CDC guidance. Ms. Bomsey.
Thank you, Dr. Fetcher. Good evening, Mrs. Brown and Board of School Directors. As is required for districts receiving funding under the American Rescue Plan and elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, we are required to review our health and safety plan every 6 months. Our last review was in August 2022, and as you heard from Dr. Fetcher, there are no changes recommended.
Okay. Any questions about the review?
Questions or comments from the board?
Okay. We move on to our next orientation.
Yes, please.
Ms. Bomsey will continue to review the student wellness policy.
So, it's the next PowerPoint, Mr. Leonetti, thank you. Federal regulations require public school districts participating in the National School Lunch and Breakfast programs to complete a review of the wellness policy and complete a wellness assessment every 3 years, and to make the results available to the public. The district established a wellness committee in 2006 for this purpose. The Wellness Committee met in January 2023 and completed the assessment, which includes a review of public involvement, notification and assessment, nutrition education, nutrition promotion, physical activity, physical education, and other school-based wellness activities. Following this assessment, there were no recommended changes to the board policy. The wellness assessment in its entirety is posted on the district website under Student Services. If anybody is interested in joining the Wellness Committee, please email or call Student Services. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? For people who are interested, can you speak to what would be some of the primary things they would discuss? Is it the menu? Is it changing how students do lunch? What are some of the things? Because parents have reached out to talk about the food in the lunchroom. So can you just speak about what they would be signing up for?
Sure, it's all of that.
All of
It's
that,
all of
okay.
that, and every school has a nutrition committee that includes students and administrators and parents in the elementary school. We do talk about the food offerings in the cafeteria, and the School Food Authority is present and part of this committee. The committee doesn't meet as often as the nutrition education committees at the school level, and there the students do make suggestions to Chartwells for their food offerings.
Thank you so much. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Okay. Dr. Fetcher?
Move on to the next orientation.
Yes, please.
Tonight, Mr. Leonetti and I will present the 2023-2024 preliminary general fund budget. The presentation and the preliminary general fund budget reflect adjustments to salaries and benefits, as well as a millage rate of 35.21 mils, which is an Act 1 index increase of 4.1%. Later this evening, you will see in agenda item number 13, the resolutions pertaining to the preliminary budget. Between this meeting tonight, February 14th, and our May 9th meeting, which is the proposed final budget, we will present updated information as we receive more information for the board as well. Mr. Leonetti.
Thank you, Dr. Fetcher. Agenda item 13.1 includes the addendum for the preliminary general fund budget. We're presenting it to you in the form required by the Department of Education. And this is the second of 4 required actions with regard to adopting the budget. We have 2 more scheduled, one in May, one in June. This is not the final, but it is a required element in accordance with Act 1 of 2006. Please recall at the January 24th meeting, we shared with you that the budget is very much statistical in nature at this present time, as we are sorely in need of additional information. And as this slide demonstrates, beginning in about the March timeframe, we start to get information with regard to state revenue, federal programs, such as title programs and access, and we are collecting from our budget administrators, our principals and our department chairs, department heads, the budget requests that they have, which will then foster additional review over the next 2 months as we work towards the proposed final budget in May. The information coming from the state will all emanate from our Governor Shapiro's budget address to the legislature, which is scheduled for March 7th. At that time, we'll begin to see information coming from PD with regard to basic education subsidies, special education subsidies, block grants, what the forecast for transportation support is, et cetera. So we have still quite a bit of information to gather to make this process complete, and as Dr. Fetcher previously stated, as we gain more information, we will share with you the impact on what is the preliminary budget at this stage. By way of review, I do like to refresh our memories regarding the incredible escalation that we experienced with regard to an expense that you have very little control over, actually no control over, which is the employer contribution for PESers. And the escalation has risen the expense budget from $12.7 million as recently as the 2013-14 school year to over $33 million of expense. It's quite the uptick when you started to see 37, 26, or over 20% increases initially in that time frame. The good news that I shared with you in January was that going from the current school year to the next school year, we're actually seeing a decrease at this present time based on the actuarial analysis that the PESers board evaluates when they set these rates. I also like to review recent history of our millage rates and our fund balance use going back to 2009, 2010. There's a cyclical nature to our millage rate increases over the years. We have sustained periods of no increases, where you can see that the millage rate was flat. And in that time period, we went from adding to fund balance to actually spending fund balance. Those expenditures of fund balance, really, that means current operating is less than current expenses, and we had to use our resources, our accumulated resources, to provide the programs and personnel for the instructional program. Followed by a couple of years of low tax increases, where we actually broke even a couple of years, accumulated some fund balance, and again, the board, upon administrative recommendation, we had 4 years of flat tax rates, and eventually we're seeing that we are expending some of our fund balance where operating revenue is less than operating expenses. Most notably in the 2021 school year, when we had to manage and deal with the impact of COVID-19 and the pandemic. The first column on this slide is the proposed preliminary budget that you approved back in January, where we had $176.9 million of local, state, and federal revenue, with $10.7 million of allocated fund balance to meet the $187.6 million of operating expenses. Highlighted in yellow in the middle column are expense changes from the proposed preliminary budget to the preliminary budget. Upon examination of the salaries and benefits budget, the staff has determined that we could decrease some of the salary expenses by almost $600,000, $80,000 in negotiated benefits, and $248,000 of mandated benefits, which totaled just under $1 million reduction in expense. I have to move north to the revenue lines because there's a decrease in the expense. There's also a state funding decrease because the state does share in the expense for mandated benefits. So with those changes articulated in the middle column, we can see that the total overall expense operating budget went from $187.6 million to $186.7, so about that $1 million decrease. And the reliance on fund balance decreased $712,000. The direction that the board provided at our last budget session was take a look at and share what would be the impact on the budget if, under certain scenarios. So in the upcoming slides, we have what this budget would look like if there was no tax increase, if there was an increase somewhere between the 4.1% increase and a 0, and we have a 2% millage rate increase examined. But it's also the time of the year where the Act 1 of 2006 requires that we examine the potential use of referendum exceptions. By way of a reminder, a referendum exception is a mechanism outlined in Act 1 of 2006 that gives the board the opportunity to raise taxes above the index for certain costs that it has little control over. In this particular case, we're talking about special education expenditures and retirement contributions. PDE provides a tool by which we can estimate what that amount would be what the allowable amount would be, and whether or not you qualify whatsoever. Retirement contributions, we did not qualify. That's even though we've have increased salaries and wages for next year in this proposed budget, with the reduction in the contribution rate, we don't qualify. However, we could qualify for an additional $730,000 of tax revenue if the board wished to raise the millage rate that's proposed by another 0.22 mils. That would raise the 35.21 mil recommendation at 4.1%, which is at the maximum for the index, to 35.343 mils, which really is almost a 5% increase. As Dr. Fetcher mentioned, we are not recommending in item numbers 13.1 and 13.2 in the agenda to use referendum exceptions as we begin to approach a 5% increase, which is pretty substantial. So we are not recommending that at this time. What that would look like, however, just so for full disclosure to the board, we would see $123.5 million of tax revenue under that scenario, a lesser reliance on fund balance from just over $10 million to just over $9 million, and a fund balance that would forecasted be end at $7.5 million. Again, this is not our recommendation. We wanted to make sure that we shared with you what is expected at this time of the budget process. As I mentioned earlier, we took a look at a scenario of a 2% tax increase. A 2% tax increase does yield an additional $3 million of revenue compared to almost $6 million at the current recommendation, which actually increases the reliance on fund balance to meet the expenses. In all of these scenarios, we are holding the expense structure constant, which is what I had shared with you in the first slide where we showed you the reductions of wages, salaries, negotiated and mandated benefits. No tax increase. We would only see an additional $750,000 of increased revenue. That would be based strictly on the fact that some of the assessed values of property in Abington have increased, and they would see about $750,000 of additional taxes collected under that scenario where we would not raise taxes, and we would see the reliance go from 12 to almost $15 million of fund balance, again keeping the expense structure as it is. So those are the scenarios that you would ask. Those are things that you can consider as we move forward through the process for when we meet in May and when we provide updates as we go through this the next couple of months. At this particular time, I'm going to ask our Assistant Business Administrator, Mr. Vittoria, to review the impact on the typical assessment for each of these scenarios, starting with the recommended 4.1% tax increase as reflected in your addendum 13.1. Mr. Vittoria.
So increasing the millage rate by 4.1%, which is the Act 1 index, from 33.83 mils to 35.21 mils, will increase the tax on a typical $141,130 home, that assessment, by $194.76, which is a 4.08% increase. But because the Sterling Act tax credit is expected to decrease by $3, that homeowner will see a $197.76 increase, which is 4.46%. The impact on the senior citizens with an assessment of $141,130 and who qualify for the Abington School District Senior Citizens Rebate Program will see an increase between $35.26 to $135.26. So this slide shows the increase of 4.1% plus the referendum exception. The millage rate would increase from 33.83 mils to 35.43 mils. This would increase a typical assessed property of $141,130 by $225.81, which is a 4.73% increase. Again, because the Sterling Act credit is expected to decrease by $3, that homeowner will see a $228.81 increase, which is 5.16%. The impact on a senior citizen with an assessment of $141,130 would be an increase, again, who qualifies for the Abington Senior Citizens Discount Program, would be an increase of $66.31 to $166.31. This slide shows the impact on the millage rate increase of 2% from 33.83 mils to 34.5 mils. A typical homeowner with an assessment of $141,130 would see an increase of $94.56, which is a 1.98% increase. And again, the Sterling Act is expected to decrease by $3, so the same homeowner would see a $97.56 increase, which is 2.2%. A 2% millage increase would not increase the tax on a senior citizen who qualifies for the Abington School District Senior Citizens Rebate Program in the first two income levels. The remaining two income levels would see an increase between $22.56 and $35.06. Back one. So this slide shows no millage rate increase. But again, so the increase is 0%, because the Sterling Act is expected to decrease by $3, the taxes would increase by $3, which is a 0.07% increase. And any homeowner that qualifies for the Senior Citizens Rebate Program would not see a tax increase in all four income levels. And then looking ahead at the budget process and schedule, at the March 28th meeting, there will be a review of the Senior Citizens Real Estate Tax Program and budget revenue. No board action will be required with these topics.
Dr. Fetcher, that concludes our presentation. If there's any questions, we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Lionelli. Mr. Vittoria.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? The mics are open. And Ms. Fazy as well. Question or comment, please feel free to speak up.
I have a question a little bit about the fund balance. Mr. Lionelli, for the four different scenarios, can you kind of point to where the fund balance would end up at the end of each?
Certainly. On the recommended increase at 4.1% for this preliminary budget, the ending fund balance is forecasted at $6.7 million. That's based on the assumption that in the current year, we spend $10.7 million that was allocated to be used in the current school year. And when we move to the plus referendum exception, which is the highest potential tax increase you can consider, we can see that that amount actually goes up slightly because you're getting more revenue on real estate taxes. So it ends up being $7.5 million. So a slight increase in the amount of ending fund balance. As we progress through the scenarios at the 2% increase, which is just under half of what we're proposing, we would, again, we see the reliance on $12.4 million and therefore an ending predicted fund balance of $4.3 million. Again, all assuming that we spend $10.7 million of what was allocated in the current school year. no tax increase. The reliance on fund balance is $14.8 million, and if that number, as we see, as that number goes up, the number down at the bottom, which is remaining predicted fund balance for June 30 of 2024, is just under $2 million. Again, assuming we spend $10.7 million. As we go through this process, Mr. Kay, we will be sharing with the board year-end predictions of how much of that fund balance we believe we will or will not spend, and we will be able to take a look at that bottom corner number that you're referring to more closely as we progress. Right now, we're just using budgeted figures.
Right. So looking at these forms, if you look at the top where it says the 30,821,000. So that was the budget left, the fund balance based on 2022, 2023.
That is the ending fund balance for 21, 22, and therefore the beginning fund balance for 22, 23, which I think is what you meant.
Yeah, beginning. So if you're doing the math, looking at these, it makes it look like the beginning was 30, and then the 18 beneath it.
Correct.
So that is about a $12 million difference.
Yes, that's correct. Because there's two factors here. I point out the amount that we use to balance our operating budget, but as you recall, we have a budget transfer here, which also impacts fund balance, and that's the transfer to pay your debt service for the 2017A bond fund, which funded the high school. So that has an impact on it as well.
So we would then begin at the 18 million.
Correct.
And then you're looking at the numbers when you go down, looking at the no tax increase. You have the 18 million, and then you have the, I'm sorry, my eyes are not great. Allocated fund balance at the 14 is what we would be allocating for the year based on the 10 million and then the 4 million in the center column. So when you go down, are you then saying that the 1 million at the bottom, the almost 2 million at the bottom, that would be, in layman's terms, the entire fund balance?
Correct. The items we're holding constant. Yes, you're correct.
Okay. I just want to explain some of these numbers. As you look at it, you see fund balance repeated, the word repeated. Sometimes the numbers look different, how they go from grouping to grouping. You have 4 different scenarios here, so we need to look at how much we're spending and how much we have at the end, because we're looking at the long term, not just 1 year.
Yes, and you're correct to point that out, because as you know, we shared with the board that we had a facilities condition assessment, and there's some high-cost items to take care of our facilities that are in the planning stages, and that fund balance is critical. One of the reasons I say it's critical is that some of those funds you can designate to address some of those needs. If we had to borrow the money to make some of those repairs, you would end up paying twice that amount, just like your home mortgage. You borrow, I'm making it up, $300,000 over the life of your mortgage, you're going to pay over $600,000. We have the same scenarios here. So having that fund balance dedicated for capital projects, which is what we do often at the end of each year, that's a very important number to have, because it assists in not helping, as you saw in the early slides, when we have a fund balance, such as we did, we were able to sustain our operations with no tax increase for a number of years.
And this brings up another valid point of the actual use of the fund balance. So this is more of a conservative plan of what we think would happen, but the number could be much different at the end.
Yes, just look at recent budget and actual. This column, I believe, I can't see the column heading, but I believe this is the planned amount, and you see we actually had a modest $800,000 increase. Thought we'd spend 10.4 in this school year, 14-15, we spent 3.7. So that's why I'm careful when we're making the presentation saying that that's the amount we're allocating. Doesn't mean we're going to spend it. We do our best not to, but there's certain contingencies built into your budget. There's certain ability to respond to unknown circumstances, such as the pandemic, where that becomes very valuable and important for the proper operation of your school district.
Those columns where there's nothing written, is that saying that we use none of it?
Correct.
Mr. Linetti, does the state recommend a percentage of an overall operating budget for district to be held as fund balance?
They do not. They do not. There's a lot of theory out there in terms of what an appropriate amount would be, but it does differ from school district to school district based on the anticipated needs of the school district for long-term planning purposes. When we were gearing up for the building program that started in 2000, we didn't have any fund balance. And the board then prior to Act 1 of 2006, was very aggressive in tax increases, ranging from 4.5% to 7% in order to be able to take on those projects. So it very much depends on the financial goals of the school district, and it varies from time period to time period. There are categories and restrictions that we have to pay attention to from the Department of Education with regard to how much uncommitted fund balance we can have, which is in our category 8%. But the PD doesn't provide any guidance on what the appropriate amount is. Up until recently, when we would borrow money, one of the most important factors on the rating agencies of our bonds was how much fund balance did you have. And we enjoyed very favorable interest rates because we looked like a very good credit risk to our bondholders because we had a significant fund balance. And also the cost of issuance. For instance, most recently in the 2017 A bond fund for the high school, we didn't have to pay for the insurance. The insurance is to protect the bondholders from default. We have a AA rating here, one of the highest ratings in the state. Very few school districts have that rating, and it's because of that fund balance that we have. Now, the rules keep changing. It's my understanding, based on a conversation Dr. Fetcher had with our financial advisor recently, is that they're now looking at how many years cumulatively can you have in a row where you don't spend any fund balance, and that helps keep your rating high. So that their perspective has even shifted. Not so much money you have in your bank, how much have you spent, or not spent actually. So it's important to try not to spend fund balance next time you go out to borrow money, because it could impact how much you pay in interest and whether or not you need to buy insurance. Dr. Fetcher, I think I adequately reflect the conversation you had with I wasn't present for that conversation.
Yes, and it's on a period of 3 years that there's no use of fund balance, provides a higher rating, even if it's a minor amount, $1 of fund balance being used. And that's a shift from what we've seen over the past, I could speak to 15 years.
You're absolutely correct.
So can I ask a sort of related question for the purposes of perspective? In the years when we were not raising taxes, were those years of low inflation?
I would say yes, and the reason I could say yes is when you look at the Act 1 index, while I'm not addressing and don't have the information to say what CPI was at that standpoint, but your index here is a reflection of inflation because it is an index that looks at salaries and wages and other costs associated with the education industry. So although there's a lag, you can see that there were periods of low index, which means that there were probably low inflation in the cumulative 3 years prior, because I believe it's a 3-year running average. So when you're looking at in the mid-twos, my opinion is that's fairly low inflation. If you go back to 2009-10, you're at 4.1, and where are we today? We're at 4.1, and we all know we've experienced inflation over the last 18 to 24 months. So it is reflective of that.
So it is a different economic climate that we're facing this year, just going off the index, the
Absol-
increase in index.
Absolutely. And, we're aware that PD is aware of some of the costs that are going up, and we believe we're going to see that reflected in subsidy amounts this year. We're anticipating there'll be an increase in the transportation subsidy based on costs associated with running a transportation program.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments?
Another question, are there districts without fund balances, or many?
I don't have an answer for that question. That's something that could be researched, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, maybe a different way of saying it. In the report, the school districts that they all had fund balances. Were any seen as, like recently, was there a large increase, or was this was over a long period of time that that they looked at for the report?
The Auditor General report, since we have this screen up, focused on this 2017-18 timeframe to the 2020-21, a period where we had taxes, we actually had millage rate held constant for that time period. I'm not familiar with what other school districts, how they've accumulated, spent their fund balances. I don't have information about those school districts.
Okay, well then let me ask you, if you don't have a fund balance, let's say you have no fund balance, what is your recourse to fund things that are emergencies, referendums and?
You give up what you're presently spending your resources on. For instance, in 1996, when we experienced some severe flooding in the Roslyn community, we had next to no fund balance at that time. And in order to get through that time period where we had to expend funds to clean up the school, furnish it, replace equipment that was damaged because the basement had filled with water, we ended up withholding 2 or 3 months of accounts payable in order to, and it happened in the springtime. So fortunately, July came around pretty quickly when new resources started to come in, but we withheld payments from vendors. We ceased programs that we were in the process of acquiring. You made urgent decisions to not spend the resources you had. So, ever since that time frame, it's been the approach from the business office and the superintendent's office and with the board to make sure that there's a certain amount of contingency in 2 areas, a fund balance that helps you deal with unknown circumstances and capital projects, but also having enough contingency built into your proposed expense budget so that you do have the ability to be flexible for the things that are unknown over the course of a year's time when you're running your budget, just like you run your household and your business.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments?
Yeah, Mr. Wynetta, you sort of alluded to this involving transportation, but my question is, are there any outstanding accounts that might eventually add to the fund balance? Payments owed by contractors or any reimbursements that might not appear on the table?
No, I believe we've accounted for anticipated revenue appropriately, and when we look at the current budget year, we've accounted for anticipated expenses appropriately and fully. As we get through the next 5 months, part of our monthly reporting will be, well, every month we provide you with a copy of the financial report, and you can see where we are with that. And I believe it's appropriately stated. There's no resources that we're not anticipating, other than I know Ms. Bomsey does an excellent job, as well as other staff, in getting grants. I believe she's a recipient of a recent grant, so that'll help, because that'll defray some of the expenses, I believe, in the school safety arena.
Any additional questions or comments? Dr. Fetcher, does that conclude our orientation for this evening?
Yes, Mrs. Brown.
Thank you. We will move forward with agenda item number 5, which are comments from citizens. Comments from citizens are being conducted both in person and by phone. The phone number to participate in public comment is 267-715-3717 and is featured on the screen at this time. If you are within the building, you may use the mics to the left or to the right of you. Please be sure to state your name and address.
Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, happy Valentine's Day. And it's a hard day for everybody to be sitting in here or whatever, be participating. The second one is it was one awesome football game on Sunday. If you play football or are a real football fan, I know it was a terrible ending, but an incredible football game. So it really was a blessing in Philadelphia to have a World Series and a Super Bowl. For 3,000 years, it's been known, and this is from Proverbs 1:5, a wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall learn unto wise counsel. I wish we had a nonpartisan school district. I wish we didn't have personal politics and indoctrination in our schools, but we do. It's healthy to get an outside look at our schools and get a reasonable report on what is found. That's exactly what the PA auditor did when looking at the school district's budget over a 4-year period. I was surprised to see that there was no discussion of this important report on the agenda of this meeting. I contacted the board and the superintendent about this issue to see if it was an oversight or intentional. I was disappointed but not surprised to learn that it was intentional. I was also sorry to see there weren't any comments from the board members in the initial meeting. The superintendent wrote me, and he also mentioned in the meeting that Abington School District was found to be in compliance with the laws of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and the regulations and requirements of the PA Department of Education. I paraphrase slightly. The auditor's report, which I encourage everybody to look at, and it's online, I can give you a link. It says Abington, and this is only one of their findings, had more than $38 million in available fund balance in the general fund each year, which went unused during our 4 audit periods. Applying for $2.6 million in referendum exceptions suggests the district had insufficient funds when it actually had $38 million of unused funds. I don't know what you said. We believe that this may be misleading to the taxpayers. Legal and illegal are not the same as right and wrong. Deceiving the taxpayers of Abington is not illegal, it is wrong. Why does ASD do it? Alexander Solzhenitsyn said, you can resolve to live your life with integrity. Let your credo be this. Let the lie come into the world, let it even triumph, but not through me. Where are the people of integrity in the ASD administration and elected leadership? When you ask yourself personally, is this right or wrong? You search your heart. When you ask yourself, can I get away with this? You ask a lawyer. Our school administration has no commitment to truth and the common good. They do not understand the aphorism, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. The auditor's report is moderate and prudent. It's wise counsel, referring back to Proverbs. It set a cordial tone and offered reasonable recommendations. To dismiss it out of hand is imprudent.
I want to thank you for your time and for your voice.
I have one sentence left. To fail to thoroughly discuss this in a public meeting is an indication of hubris. Imprudence and hubris are no way to run a school district. I encourage everyone to read through this report and see how reasonable it is.
Thank you for your voice.
You're welcome.
Mr. Snyder, do we have another caller? Mr. Sneed, pardon me. Do we have another caller on the line?
Yes, next citizen for public comment is phone number ending in 1308. Please state your full name and address.
Gene Geld.
Were we able to hear that? We can hear you. Thank you. If you can hear my voice, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Gene Geld. I live in on Harbison Way. in Jenkintown. I read about this, with what happened with the budget, and I'm really calling to tell you how stunned I am about the lack of character of the school district. Dr. Fetcher down. I think you've betrayed your family and friends and all of Abington. You don't show any remorse. You deceived us. No remorse, but you doubled down. You know, I know there was a loophole. You didn't have to use it. What a disappointment. So I would suggest to you, why don't you just all resign? Because you've really done a terrible job for us. You don't represent us. You represent your own interests. And that's the end of my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Sneak, can you confirm that there are no additional callers on the line?
That is confirmed.
Thank you. If there are additional speakers in the room, please be sure to state your name and address.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
You could just come up a little bit more.
Good?
There you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Karen Jean Charles. I'm an Osceola. I have a couple questions for the school district. One is, and this is regarding bullying in the school, which was a recent issue for me and my child. I know the school, the district has the procedure on bullying. The procedure addresses the consequences, but it doesn't address anything about the victim's rights and what happens to the children who are bullied. So I would like to know, what is the, number one, what's the plan, right, to prevent ongoing bullying? And the second question I have is on the equitable education tab on the website. I took a look at that because of recent situations again. 18% of the school, the students in the district are children of color, black children specifically, as stated on the website. But the majority of disciplinary actions are against these students. In the high school, 21% of the students are African American, and 51% of the disciplinary actions are against these children. What is the district's plan to make sure that there's equal process? The third question I have is regarding the school district's plan, the 2022-2025, I think it was, plan, where it states that black children have more discipline and they are underperforming their peers. So what is the plan to make sure that these children are performing at the level of their peers? Those are my questions.
Thank you for your voice. Mr. Sneak, can you confirm that there are no additional callers on the line?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Are there any additional people within the room who would like to make a comment? Seeing that there are none, Dr. Fetcher.
Mr. Lionetti, would you like to respond first to the comments regarding the Auditor General's report?
I would. I very much want to go back to my presentation because it reflects the facts that were presented by the Auditor General, and I want to reiterate them. The time period under study by the Auditor General was from the 2017-18 school year to the 2020-21 school year. 4 years of no tax increases. The Auditor General did express his opinion about using a referendum exception going from the 2016-17 school year to the 2017-18 school year. This jumped from 30.83 mils to 31.77. In the subsequent years, we did exactly as the Auditor General would have advised, which was there was no increases because we had a fund balance. Referendum exception was needed in this regard. This is the year we borrowed $90 million. Special education costs were going up, our enrollment was going up, and that was an appropriate tax increase done in full transparency through all of the budget sessions and discussions. All of our materials were available online, and to categorize us as using referendum exceptions in that time period is false. These are the facts. 4 years of no tax, of the same tax level.
And just to, I'm sorry, I did not catch the name of the last person who spoke. I want to address a few of your points and kind of place some things into a direction that where the district is. The first, in terms of bullying, it's an ongoing issue, K to 12, and it's pervasive throughout the country as well. And I agree with you on that, as it is a major issue for us to tackle and to continue to tackle. I think the best way that the district has worked with that, other than individual cases working with parents and administrators in each building, is through our district bullying prevention committee. And within that committee, many stakeholders from parents, students, and also teachers and administrators come together to take a look at our policies, if we need to do a revision of our policies, and work on that. So I would welcome any parent who is concerned to be part of that bullying committee. And Ms. Bomsey is the contact person for that as well. Or they can, anyone can contact my office, and I can point them in the correct direction to address that. In terms of disparity in school discipline, some of the things that we have done to put that into place: one, we do a data analysis for that school discipline, and we look at that in terms of demographics as well, and we look at what can we do to address this. And we mostly do that through trying to prevent issues from occurring with our school-wide positive behavior support programs. But when we look at the data, we are not there yet, and we are not, at a point where we could say that we've accomplished all of our goals in that regard. One thing that we did last year was hire a school climate officer at Abington, what was then Abington Junior High School, as a way to begin to address some of those issues. We are also working with a multi-agency Montgomery County group to address school discipline at the high school level. Right now, we are participating in a pilot program with Georgetown University. In terms of I believe your last question was a student achievement, especially in when we look at our disaggregated data. Each school throughout the district has what we call a getting results plan, and it's a data analysis first, and then from that data, what is the plan to address that data and goals within there. We specifically target our data and look at ways that we can assist our students and improve our students and lend the supports for them. So that's a process that occurs annually. Recently, with the across the district, every or district leadership team met to do a mid-year review of where we are with the data, and then where we are with different various interventions that we have with that data. And essentially to just see what's working, what's not working, and what can we do more of. And when we find
something that has helped students increase in scores. We often want to expand on that, and then if there is an intervention that's not working as well, obviously, get rid of that intervention. We are on the second diagnostic test of the year, so we compare the growth between the first diagnostic test at the beginning of the school year, and we have just completed that throughout the district on the second one. And we can see their individualized students, how they perform, where their growth is. We have various programs that we use to specifically target, through intervention, deficits within each student. A parent can also work with the school to see their individual students' goals, growth, and performance as well. So in terms of how we are tackling it, that is through our plans and our data. We're specifically looking at growth from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. But no doubt that there is need to improve constantly, especially after the past couple of years. And we are looking on how we can be on a track for that improvement. But definitely within that process is the importance of looking at our disaggregated data and making sure we're addressing things appropriately. And in some cases, how can we change our practice to address it more effectively? So I thank you for bringing that up. And if you would like more information about any of these, please contact my office and I can put you in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to agenda item number 7. Ms. Glaser, can you please read the recommendation to approve the January meeting minutes?
Yes. That the Board of School Directors approves the minutes of the board meeting on January 10th, 2023, and the board meeting on January 24th, 2023.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
The minutes.
Anything? This is a roll call vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. None opposed. Ayes have it, and motion passes. Ms. Glasser, can you please read the recommendation for approval of the personnel addenda?
That the Board of School Directors approves the changes in personnel as reflected in Personnel Addendum Number 8.1 and Confidential Personnel Addendum Number 8.1A.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. The personnel addendum begins with item number 1 in the appointment of 3 professional employees for the 2022-2023 school year. Under item number 2 is the change of assignment for 1 long-term substitute teacher. Item number 3 is the change of status for 11 professional staff members who have submitted the necessary paperwork to change their salary class. Item number 4 is a request for leaves of absence for 9 professional employees. The personnel addendum continues with hiring of substitutes, compensation for crisis prevention, intervention training, interpreter and translation services, events, IEPs, and support personnel items. I bring your attention to item number 17 and the retirement of Ms. Karen Harold, a clerk at McKinley Elementary School who has served Abington for 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Ms. Harold, thank you for your service. This is a roll call vote. Ms. Flanagan.
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Ms. Glasser, can you please read the recommendation for use of buildings and grounds?
That the Board of School Directors approves the applications for permits for use of buildings and grounds as reflected in Addendum Number 9.1. All permits are subject to change per the provisions of the Health Safety Plan pertaining to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
The permit addendum continues to reflect typical requests for the use of buildings and grounds for this time of year for meetings, sports, and other school events and activities.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Mrs. Glasser, can you please read the recommendation for the approval of the 2022-2023 abbreviated school days?
That the Board of School Directors approves the schedule of early dismissals for the 2023-2024 school year as reflected in addendum number 10.1.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. For the 2023-2024 school year, there are 2 elementary and Abington Middle School early dismissal days are recommended to be used for parent and guardian conferences in November 2023 and 2 in March of 2024. This includes the second day of conferences being held into the evening. The Abington Senior High School schedule will remain with 1 early dismissal date in May 2024 associated with the senior prom and professional development for teachers. In addition, we are proposing 5 early dismissal days for all schools again this year, which includes professional development opportunities for teachers. 4 of these days fall on the day before a holiday break, and 1 is the last day of school in June.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Mrs. Glasser, can you please read the recommendation for the 2023-2024 school calendar?
Okay, that the Board of School Directors approves the school calendar for 2023-2024 as reflected in addendum number 11.1.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. The first day of school attendance for grades K through 6 and grade 9 is on Tuesday, September 5th, 2023. The first day of student attendance for grades 7 and 8 and 10 through 12 is on Wednesday, September 6, 2023. For the opening of the new school year, teacher and service days are recommended for Wednesday, August 30th, Thursday, August 31st, and Friday, September 1st. This calendar reflects 13 holidays when schools and offices are closed, additional in-service days for teachers, and early dismissal dates for parent and guardian conferences, as I mentioned previously, and professional development. Should the election date that is listed on there as April 23rd change, we will adjust the calendar accordingly, and whatever date that would be, we would have our in-service for our teachers on that date. Upon your approval, this calendar will be communicated to our parents and guardians, staff, and publicized on our website and through social media.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Ms. Glasser, can you please read the recommended action for the 2023-2024 public board meeting dates?
That the Board of School Directors approves the board meeting dates for the 2023-2024 school year as reflected in addendum number 12.1 and directs the board secretary to advertise these dates in accordance with the provisions of Act 84 of 1986 of the General Assembly of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania.
Second.
We have a second, Dr. Fetcher.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. As we do annually, we have looked at the relationship between the school calendar and public board meetings, which are usually held on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month. The December reorganization meeting is recommended to be held on Monday, December 4th, 2023, which is the first Monday in December. and the December regular meeting is recommended to be held on Tuesday, December 12th.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Ms. Glasser, can you please read together the recommendations for the preliminary general fund budget in agenda items 13.1 and 13.2?
That the Board of School Directors adopt the preliminary general fund budget of the Abington School District for the 2023-2024 school year and the amount of $188,353,713 as shown in addendum number 13.1, which includes a millage rate of 35.21 mils. 13.2 goes on to say the proposed preliminary general fund budget identifies the proposed expenditures of funds as itemized for the fiscal year beginning the first day of July 2023. The necessary revenue for same will be provided by a real estate transfer tax of 0.5% and by a tax of 35.21 mils on the dollar on the total amount of the assessed valuation of all property taxable for school purposes in the Abington School District, or at a rate of $3.51 on each $100 of assessed valuation of taxable property, and by an earned income tax of 0.5% on residents of Abington School District.
Second.
We have a second. Dr. Fetcher.
The 2023-2024 preliminary general fund budget was discussed under our board orientation this evening. We'd be happy to answer any additional questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
Just be very clear of what we're voting on so that there's no confusion with the public. This is not voting the budget forward. This is just giving us our ceiling of what we're allowed to ask for as we wait for a variety of numbers to come in. It's just one more step in a very long process. It is not raising the taxes. It's just part of the process.
This is the preliminary general fund budget. It's not the final budget.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Seeing that there are none, Ms. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye. Ayes have it and motion passes. Mrs. Glasser, can you please read the recommended action for the 2023-2024 MCIU budget?
That the Board of School Directors, in accordance with Section 914-A-6I Act 102 of 1970, approves the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit 2023-2024 membership services budget in the amount of $2,032,450 for the 2023-2024 school year, and said budget to be further acted upon by a proportionate vote of all school directors.
Second.
We have a second. Dr. Fetcher.
Mr. Laniadi, please review the member services budget.
Thank you, Dr. Fetcher. The MCIU membership services expense budget reflects a $177,620 increase, or 9.6% compared to the current budget year of $1,854,830. The expense budget is funded by $1.56 million of contributions from the 22 member school districts. There is a $43,400 increase compared to the current year, and this year is the first increase in member schools' aggregate contributions in 4 years. The current year member schools' contribution is just over $1.51 million. Abington's contribution is $106,721, which is a $2,753 or 2.65% increase compared to this year's budget contribution. Abington's 2023-2024 payment is 6.83% of the total contributions of the membership schools and is consistent with last year's contribution, which supports professional learning, community and government relations, and technology services. If you have any further questions, we'll do our best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Ionetti.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, I'd like to, if somebody could talk a little bit about the MCIU, what they do for us, where the money goes.
I know you mentioned in your last sentence, but can you expound upon what that looks like? How do we use it?
Yes, there's three elements. Professional development. They provide professional development courses for our professional staff. Government and community relations. There is support provided by the MCU because they have a legislative liaison that actively works with the folks in Harrisburg to make sure that the issues that are important to school districts, such as charter school reform, are key elements shared with our legislators, as well as technology services, which can be vast, anywhere from taking advantage of repairs to providing joint services that all the school districts are able to enjoy and tap into, things of that nature.
Any additional questions or comments from the board? Mrs. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Mrs. Glasser, can you please read the recommendation for the confidential student matter?
That the board, that the Board of School Directors approves the confidential student matter as reflected in addendum number 15.1.
Second.
Dr. Fetcher, we have a second.
Thank you, Mrs. Brown. Keeping in mind the confidentiality of student matters, I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board? Seeing that there are none, Mrs. Flanagan?
Ms. Frazier?
Aye.
Mr. Kay?
Aye.
Dr. Mowry?
Aye.
Mrs. Glasser?
Aye.
Mr. Mohammed?
Aye.
Ms. Fazy?
Aye.
Mrs. Brown?
Aye, ayes have it, and motion passes. Dr. Fetcher, any additional items for this evening?
The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture reviewed our single audit report for the year ending June 30th, 2020. The review found the district's schedule of expenditures of federal awards as acceptable and in compliance.
Thank you. Any additional business to be brought about from my fellow?
I also provide for you the conference attendance and professional leaves and the capital improvement projects.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any additional business to be brought about from my fellow board members?
Yes, my question would be for Ms. Bonzi. I know you spoke about the wellness program. Is it primarily nutrition, or are there a social emotional component?
In the wellness policy, there's not really social emotional, but it's nutritional, it's nutrition, physical activity, other school-related activities, and in the end, that does help the social emotional wellness.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay. We'll move forward with agenda item 18, which is comments from citizens. Comments from citizens are being conducted both in person and by phone. The phone number for public comment is 267-715-3717 and is featured on the screen at this time. You may call in on your mobile phone or on your landline phone. If you're within the building, please be sure to state your name and address.
Hi, Joe Rooney. Just a couple of quick points. First off, if you're listening to this, the amount of taxes we pay each year is best reflected on the income side or the collection side of the budget. Mr. Lyon probably won't put it up right now. But if they say they don't increase the millage that we pay, that doesn't mean we're not paying more taxes every year. So since 2010, our taxes have increased by a couple of $1 million every single year. And where we are in the school budget right now is that collecting $175 million from Abington Township taxpayers is still not enough. So they're looking at the $40 million that's in the fund balance that is taxpayers' money, and they want to spend that also. The problem is not on the income side, and it's not on the bank account side. The taxpayers have done their part. The problem is on the spending side. And this young lady talks about the problems that are going with underperforming students in our school at $180 million. It's not any better than it was when we spent $125 million when I moved back into here. So you have to understand there's a difference between increasing the millage rate, which means they're taxing you more on your house, and you paying more taxes, because the income comes in through several different sources, but it's all Abington taxpayers paying all that money. It's not coming out of a well or some special room where there's extra dollars. The second one is when they talk about the 2017 bond and how we have to have a really good bond rating. We paid for bonds when the CPI was about 1.7% at a 4 and 5% coupon. We did not get a good deal on that. The investors jumped at it, and that was really great because it was all sold fast. But folks, if you're listening to this, that was not a good deal. If you want to look at scary numbers, look out, and any of you all can do it too. You look at the last 10 years of when we pay these bonds off. We're paying $10 million a year, and where that money's not reflected in our budget right now, I don't know where it's coming from. And I've mentioned it before. You all have a tough job. You're not doing it, but you all have a tough job because we're supposed to educate kids, we're supposed to do it at a reasonable expense, and we're supposed to look forward. In the June meeting, there were $200 million worth of capital projects that the school district went over. They're planning on borrowing all that money. We didn't borrow, we borrowed every dollar to pay for the high school. We didn't use any of the capital, the committed or uncommitted fund balance. That was all borrowed money. That $40 million is just taxpayer money that's just a gravy so they don't have to exercise fiscal discipline. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. We have a caller on the line.
Yes, next citizen for public comment is phone number ending in 1308. Please state your full name and address.
Gene Geld, Harbison Way, Jenkintown.
Thank you. We can hear you.
Good.
If you can hear me, we can hear you, and we're ready to receive your comment.
Okay, fine. This is Gene Geld. I want to comment on the Auditor General's report. There were two recommendations. One was that the loophole be changed. I'd like to know if the lobbyist that we're paying for is lobbying our legislators to change the loophole, and if the board will lobby and support changing the loophole so that it isn't abused again. And secondly, never mind. That's all of my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sneed, can you confirm that there are no additional callers on the line?
That is confirmed.
Any additional speakers within the room? Dr. Fetcher?
Yes, I'd like to go back to the previous set of comments from citizens and expand on that. I'd like to ask Dr. Brown if the comment about the webpage and the equitable practices came up, and although I did touch on some of it, I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand on that as well.
Sure. One of the things with the information on the webpage, that was reflective of last school year, so the the previous school year. So what we do, using that information, we reflect with the school teams over the summer at our leadership retreats. And additionally, in terms of this current school year, just to give you a snapshot of some of the work that happens at the school level, it really works in two different directions. So the first is, there are programs in place like peer mediation, the pilot that you mentioned, that are aimed at working to resolve conflict, working to limit and reduce the use of things like suspension and exclusion from school. Secondly, all of our school teams have access to information and really real-time analysis in terms of looking at the present level of infractions and things that occur in school and trying to find ways to better meet the needs of students. And we do that in a number of ways. To give you an example, one of the things that we've started to work on is actually providing more case study exercises for faculty and staff to begin to analyze scenarios that could occur in school and think about ways in which like from the adult perspective, we can take greater ownership of some of the things that have happened and work to better prepare for scenarios that could occur in the future. It's just an example of some of the things that happen in schools to, again, try to, like you mentioned, be more proactive in terms of thinking about student conduct in school, but also, shift the responsibility for that, back to what could we do differently in terms of trying to better meet the needs of the students in school.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I have no further comments.
Thank you. At this time, we'll have closing comments from my fellow directors, starting with Ms. Frazier.
None, thank you.
Mr. Kay? Dr. Mowry?
I just wanted to note that this is Black History Month, and so I hope all our students are having a good time learning about that this month, but then also every month of the school year.
Thank you. Ms. Glaser? Glasser.
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 So close, so close. No, I do not have any comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Muhammad?
Happy Black History Month. I hope it's full of learning for everyone in our community, students, adults, all of us. Happy Valentine's Day.
Ms. Fazy?
Happy Valentine's Day.
Dr. Fetcher?
No further comment.
Thank you. I would like to say Happy Valentine's Day, but I also want to say something in regard to bullying. I appreciate the comment that was made about shifting the responsibility so that we can take more ownership on what happens in the building, and we can analyze our behavior as teachers, as administrators, and things of that nature. But I also call on, in addition to that, I call on for our community, I call on for our parents, I call on for our neighbors to own that responsibility as well. We have to bring back that concept of a village. And when we have issues, that we can talk them out, and the parents are part of the solution. So I welcome that as an educator, as a community member, as a parent who has children in this district, that we all take ownership over that and we do our part, because we must do better. The school must do better. Our community must do better. Parents, we must do better, and we must invest in our children. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. This meeting is adjourned.